Hello, everyone. This is Darcinovia here. It's been a while since I reviewed Star Trek content, and this is on Final Frontier. This is another one of those novels that are written, in the original series. This particular novel came out in the late 1980s, and, well, certain details with this novel are not going to match up with the modern Star Trek literary verse. This is written at a time when the Star Trek literary verse wasn't like it was today, where all the stories were interconnected and felt like one cohesive universe. Yeah, the newer stuff does tie in to the older stuff, but this novel in particular does not actually, fit with the modern literary canon because when the original Enterprise was first, built and when it went on its first mission. The reason this cannot fit is purely because of Star Trek Enterprise, which takes place a century before the original series. Now, there's no way, the person who wrote this novel could have known that, so whatever. With despite that detail, how's the story? Because that's what's important at the end of the day. Well, the story of this book, Final Frontier, um, the parts that take place in the present, which is about 5% of the story, deals with the aftermath on the city of the Edge of Forever, which arguably is probably the greatest Star Trek episode of all time. Not in my opinion, but it is the best episode of the original series. And there's a lot of material that actually, mention this episode and the effects that it has had on Kirk, especially. And the present part of this novel, Kirk deals with a dilemma of him, leaving Starfleet because the ability to command and make decisions that are very difficult are becoming too much for him to bear. And ironically, this book it does take the liberty of actually, you know, having writings by his father, which are written in cursive, which I had a difficult time reading because I cannot read cursive, and I kind of wish she would not have had the letter written in cursive because I could barely read it. But I didn't let that deter me from reading this book. Now, a bulk of this book takes place in the late 22nd century when the Enterprise was first activated. Now, again, mind you, this is a contradiction with the modern Star Trek canon. So keep that in mind. Anyway, George Kirk, the father of James T. Kirk, is drafted with the first captain of the Enterprise, Robert April, on a mission to save people trapped in space. Now things go wrong like they would in any good Star Trek story, and the crew of the Enterprise have to not only are they stuck inside the neutral zone, they have to get out of the neutral zone in order to avoid being obliterated. And the thing I really do love about this novel is the Romulan character that's introduced. This is the first, one of the first instances that I know. I know there's other Star Trek novels that dive somewhat into the culture of the Romulans. I've always found the Romulans to be very interesting, more so than the Vulcans, in my opinion. And it was interesting getting a glimpse of their culture, through the main Romulan character. And at the very end of this story, George and Robert are in a dilemma where do they, use the Enterprise to, invade the planet that the Romulans, reside in, and basically start a war? Or do they just leave and leave it to the next generation to deal with it? It was a pretty good story. And of course, at the end, we all know Kirk would not leave Starfleet. I mean, this does take place during, the airing of the original series after all. As a story of its own, what do I think? I think it's a pretty solid book. Even if it doesn't fit well with the modern Star Trek literary canon, I do think it's an enjoyable read, and considering Danny Cheney has a really good reputation of writing Star Trek novels and basically making gold, pretty much everything that she writes is pretty much some of the best Star Trek, books you're ever going to get. Then again, this is classic Star Trek. When you pick up a novel like this is the classic era of the Star Trek expanded universe. In a simpler time, before everything got large in the Star Trek expanded universe, where it's so big and it's so, some would say, convoluted. There's so many connections that people would find overwhelming. Which is one reason why, if you're getting into Star Trek novels, I'd recommend with a novel like this. A standalone story. I'll probably get to that another time. What would I recommend for those who are interested in reading Star Trek novels? But that's not the time or place for this video. Final Frontier, I'd give this a classic rating. I think it's one of the best Star Trek novels I've read. It's a very enjoyable experience, and I am looking forward to reviewing another classic Star Trek novel, one of the first actually, called Spock Must Die. I will review that next week. See you later, and may we all live long and prosper. Thank you, and stay safe, everyone.